Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is returning guest Jonathan Pageau. He's the host of the Symbolic World, which is a YouTube channel and a website and a publishing company, and he has historically spent his time critically examining from a narrative point of view cultural and current events, and has now turned toward illustrating and composing fairy tales and works of deep fiction or mythology. In this conversation, we talk about current events and their mythological implications, such as evil and Israel and World War II, and all these hot topics that seem to get people going so strongly for one reason or another. I think we approach these topics with care, nuance, and courage. At least from his point of view. I don't know how courageous I am. I'm just asking questions. But you can find Jonathan's work linked below, as well as links to support this channel. Without further ado, here is Jonathan Pageau.
Hello.
Jonathan.
Wait a second here. I gotta fix my camera. What are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I would say I am doing well, all things considered.
All things considered, huh? Did another flood hit you?
No.
Okay,
I'd
good.
say things are good.
Yeah. I think you're at peak performance.
Yeah? Is that what you feel?
Yeah, no, I think your star is very high right now.
Well, that's very kind. Yeah. Well, we'll see as we keep talking about this more difficult things. We'll see what happens. I've been talking more about World War II and all that stuff, and it's kind of scary to talk about, but I guess we have to.
Oh man, I know there's Hercules with the pillars, but the symbol of Hercules. No, not Hercules. Samson.
Yeah, again.
Those foundational myths.
Gonna crush this foundational myth. Well, it's not that I don't want to crush anything. It just feels like it's already happening. We just have to help people navigate through the chaos. It's just happening to us.
Yeah, it's hard to tell between just the sensational energy that's released from breaking a pattern and actual, a deeper force emerging.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. One of the things that I've been trying to do when I talk about things that are more difficult is I try to leave time. I think that that's one of the things that is helpful. There are a lot of people that jump in, and they just try to kind of just hit while things are hot and just kind of go at it. I always try to leave like 1 week or 2 weeks if I'm going to talk about something that's difficult or controversial,
Wait, is that what you mean by time? 1 or 2 weeks?
Well, 1 or 2 weeks at least means that you're not going to fall into the churn, like this weird churn of kind of attention grabbing.
Yes.
And so usually what happens is if you wait a week or 2 weeks, the thing you do doesn't go viral, which sounds weird because people say, well, what, you don't want to go viral? Yeah, that's exactly the case. I actually do. The things I don't want them to go viral, at least not in a ridiculous way. I want them to have influence, but not in just that, that kind of churn way. I don't know how to explain it. Like the news cycle is such a vicious mistress. It's very, people fall into that and get addicted because it works. Like you'll get the clicks, you'll get the attention.
Yeah. We just moved houses across the state from Western Washington to Eastern Washington.
Okay.
So I'm in the middle of setting up my studio now. I'm kind of favoring the black background, but
yeah, it's pretty stark. I mean, when I saw you, I was like, wow, standing out. I like it. It looks good.
It'll look better in post because you're just seeing the crappy camera, not my good camera. But but I was just too busy. I had to load up a U-Haul and trek across and pack and then clean and then unpack. And my parents came to help us. And
how long are we talking about? How long have you been there?
Oh, we just got here a week ago. This past Sunday would been a week.
Okay. Yeah, so that's pretty new.
But in the middle of all that, I just didn't have time or energy to check what was going on. And it's phenomenal, like how quickly out of the loop you are.
Well, the thing too that's great is that if that happens to you a little bit, you realize that a lot of the stuff that looks so, how can I say it, like just so crucial, like so important, you just have to say something, you have to get involved, it actually isn't. Like it's just actually, it's just this constant churn, and people just keep are addicted to it. But
well, that's what's fascinating and powerful about the tack that you've taken from the first moment that you introduced yourself to the tacosphere, the discourse, the news sphere, whatever they call it.
The tacosphere?
I like taco, but it's
I know,
taco.
it just sounds weird. The tacosphere?
You know,
Yeah.
is that you're looking at patterns. You're looking at symbols. So you know, that's where order and chaos kind of intermingle, where the imagination and attention and dreams and guesses and intuition and then current events all kind of intersect. So you have deeper stilts already from the get-go.
I hope so. Yeah.
Things, you know?
One of the things that makes it interesting is sometimes people struggle to get it at first is that a lot of people are trying to get to what the facts are, like what's happening, like what's actually happening. And that is I'm not saying that you shouldn't know what the facts are, but even before you know what the facts are, you can actually see what's happening if you look at the story that's being set up. Even if aspects of the story is propaganda, even if aspects of the story is a lie, the reason why people are pushing it is important to understand. And so you can kind of get one step removed and say, okay, well, why are they saying this? Like, you know, why are people pushing for this or that story? Even whether or not I know if it's representation of something that actually happened or not, you can talk about things in a way that, like you said, in some ways is looking at patterns and storytelling, and you don't have to worry too much. You do have to worry about it ultimately, but it's a secondary issue. You know, like if you think about when the George Floyd stuff was happening, like everybody was talking about what actually happened and how did he actually die and all of that. And I mean, those things are important, but it was mostly important to understand what the hell was going on. Like, even if he died, even if he was killed by the cop, why was the entire world being galvanized? Why was the entire world kind of moving in a certain direction? Why were people celebrating him the way they were? Why was this getting attention in the way that it was? And that's more important. At least for the thing, I mean, it's not for the guy who's being accused of killing him. Obviously, that for him, something else is important. But for us, kind of watching from the outside and trying to kind of get a sense of what's happening in our society, watching the narrative trends are more useful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, useful, and also they help you from being white pilled or red pilled or black pilled, you know, because you're kind of looking at the effects of the drug rather than taking the drug yourself, maybe a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, to some extent. You know, I think that a lot of people who get red pilled in the weirdest way, you know, sometimes it's as if they discover that everything that has been told around them is maybe a lie, and that now they're discovering what actually happened and what's real about the world. Yeah. But often what's actually happening is rather that people are discovering that there's another narrative, another possible narrative that they hadn't been, that was completely outside of their line of sight, and they couldn't see. So when they start to see that other narrative, it can shatter their world for a while, and it can also seduce people into believing the other narrative more. How can I say this? With a kind of blind faith that characterize how they believe with the first one, you know. So you get people who get, and you see that happening now. It's like, well, if America lied to us for all these years about all these wars, then all of a sudden I start to believe the propaganda of their enemies, which is like those two things. You know, it doesn't mean because one is true that the other, you know, the other is false, or that one, like, it doesn't mean that because you stop believing in one that you have to believe in the other, you know, or that if you can't see that one is a narrative structure and the other isn't. It's like, no, both are. You can, and so you can recognize, you have to be able to recognize both. And I think that that's what's so hard for people to do. I mean, it seems like that's one of the hardest things that people can't seem to be able to do. It's like they just as soon as one story collapses, then they just embrace right away the other one, which isn't always the most, at least especially when things are shaking the way they are now. It's not necessarily the wisest thing to do.
Yeah. Does that hold true with something like orthodoxy? Somebody's some modern young man, let's say, who's looking at the dearth of possibility and the sacred and all the ruins of modernity that modernity has wrought on the meaning of life, and then turns to a faith like orthodoxy and just throws himself into it because it's happening right now. I wonder what your thoughts are on, because my stepdaughter just got catechized on Easter.
Really?
And yeah, there's like a huge uptick for like younger millennials going.
I didn't know it was so close to you though. Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think it's a real thing, but I think that there is a danger. Obviously, I'm happy when people become Christians. I think that's the best story. But there is a danger, and you see it. Like if you know the Orthobros, there's a certain type of person that they move. When they move, all of a sudden, like they're literally wearing their beard like Tsar Nicholas, and they start to fetishize, Putin and fetishize Russia in ways that is a little naive. What we hope is that the clergy and the people in the church will, in some ways, mitigate their enthusiasm. But maybe it's difficult because it's always when you looking for, let's say, energy to move in a direction, you kind of need a story. You need the story to kind of move you. So it's okay to embrace the story, but you have to be careful a little bit because, like you said, there can be a disillusion down that road if you're not able to kind of make the story land in a way that is reasonable. Yeah. If you just embrace everything in a kind of blind, a kind of idealism or whatever. Like people become Orthodox, you're like, well, I'm going to find a spiritual father, and I'm going to become holy, and all of these things are going to happen, and it's like, well, life's more complicated. Life's more complicated.
Wow. So. I mean, I remember very fervently, well, not fervently, but very deeply longing to be holy in the darker part of my life when I was probably 21, 22, 20, 19, 20. And I remember telling that to a girl. She's like, what do you want in life? I'm like, I want to be holy. And she just laughed at me. She laughed at me so hard, which I understood, but I was really offended because she had no, bearing on what I meant by that,
Yeah, she didn't understand. But I think that's fine. Of course, we have to be holy, but there is what St. Maximus the Confessor talks about, what he calls the sins of the right hand. He talks about the sin of self-sufficiency and pride and a kind of arrogance. And you see that in monastic writings a lot, right? This idea of prelest or of kind of spiritual delusion, where out of a desire to be holy, we in some ways are blinded to certain aspects of what's of the world. And downstream from that is a kind of fall. So I think the middle way is the best way, It's hard to know what that is. And the middle way moves a little, it seems to get tugged one way or the other. But, it's dangerous when can I say this? Like the kind of, well, one of the ways also you can see it that is probably better, like especially when new converts come to Orthodoxy, is that it's normal that they're attracted to a form of rigorism. It's normal because you're like, well, I'm looking to move out of this chaotic life that I've had, and I want something that's going to found me. And so they tend to move towards a kind of rigorism, where they want to apply the canons, they want to fast in the proper way, they want to, do the things in the proper manner, and that's a completely normal thing. But you can know when it's out of balance when the person starts to apply their rigorism to everybody else.
Oh, yeah.
Right. When it's like, and then you start to accuse everybody of not being as rigorous as they should be, then that's probably when the story is going too far. Like you have to you have to be able to manage that kind of justice and mercy, right? Together. So,
is there a story that, I guess you say Christianity is the best story. I'm wondering, like, were there moments of refinement for you, like in the application of the story to the world, universalizing?
Yeah, I think that, One of the biggest refining moments for me was, in some ways, when I was young. I think I believed in the hippie Christ for a while, especially when I was at art school and I was a kind of student. So I kind of like the Saint
What's
Francis
he
version.
like? Yeah.
The Saint Francis version of Jesus, that loves little children and forgives everyone and
Yeah.
is
Always has a
like,
guitar.
yeah,
Yeah.
he always
Six
has a
string
guitar.
guitar. Yeah.
And so I think I kind of believed in that. And I thought in some ways that being a Christian meant being nice. Like you should be nice and you should be
Yeah.
really nice with everyone and you should just be kind and stuff. And I think one of the refining moments in my life was when I actually read the scripture and I'm like, oh man, Jesus brings some heat sometimes. He's a
Yeah.
pretty harsh guy.
Yeah.
And sometimes he is exactly that open and, forgiving and all that. But sometimes he also is quite harsh on especially on hypocrites and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think kind of getting that balance. And since then I have these two images, I guess, of Christ, kind of Christ as the king and Christ on the cross. And I believe those two have to balance themselves out. Like you kind of need both and you have to be careful not to embrace just one or the other.
Yeah. Well, you left out, or you've moved away from Christ, the preschool teacher, then? Just
Christ, the preschool teacher. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, in the sense of Christ on the cross, in the sense that he accepts all. Like that's the idea of Christ on the cross, right? He kind of accepts all things, and then the Christ as King, as the Christ who judges all things. And I tended to to have favor for the Christ that accepts all things. But I think the image is really both, and you kind of have to hold that intention.
Yeah, yeah. What is it from your narrative function of your sight, your wisdom, your intuition? What is the path of Canada with the massive immigration? How is that? I mean, how does it affect you personally to watch your country just kind of surrender itself to the outsider? And what do you think that's going to portend?
I don't know what's going to happen. It's a very. I think that the issue with the modern state and the modern world is that we just always tend to move towards these extremes, and we struggle because we don't know what identity is and we don't know where to place it. So we're constantly kind of moving and shifting between where to place our identity or how the different identities balance themselves out. And so, even here in Quebec, right, we had a major nationalist wave, right, with the boomers. Like the boomers after World War II kind of moved into this major nationalist wave. And then that kind of gave way to this internationalism, this kind of globalist idea of everybody lives everywhere and there's no borders and all of this. I mean, it wasn't explicitly mentioned that way, but now we see it like with Justin Trudeau's 10 years of nation, post-national nation and all that. It's a little worrisome because we pushed it so far that now you can feel like at some point the other side is going to start to show itself again. So, but the result of that, it's difficult to know how they're going to play out. How are we going to play out that swing? Is it going to be reasonable? Because now we live in a situation where we are a bunch of different types of people that live in the same place. So how do we now find some form of unity, that that has some backbone, right? So I don't know how it's going to play out. I fear the worst sometimes. Sometimes I get the sense that maybe if, like in the U.S., we clamp down a little and tried to, first of all, stop bringing in millions of people constantly. I mean, the plan, what was the Liberals' plan, was to reach 100 million by 2030, which is
Why would they want that?
Insane.
Why do they need that?
I mean, they had this idea of a kind of like a need for a kind of demographic increase to make us more like a bigger, kind of power, I guess. But really, it seemed like they just wanted to destroy the idea of the nation, and kind of move towards participate in moving towards a kind of global culture where everywhere is everywhere, and there's this constant mixture. But that obviously it's not going to hold, because if you make the world into jello, whatever is pointed is going to just stab right through it. That's the problem of these extremes, is that people don't realize that if you Right. If you move towards an extreme, then you make yourself completely vulnerable to the other side, because that's how it works. If you make yourself so unified in such a pointed national thing, then any diversity could take you out. But the other side is also true, right? It's like in a world where everybody is just blah 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 and there's no identity, then you can see things like Islam, for example, just kind of ramping up in that world and taking over. So how are we going to find the balance? I don't know. I don't know what it's going to look like,
When Trump was teasing y'all about making you the 51st state,
Yeah.
it was really funny to watch all these boomers who were totally fine with just the dismantling of their country, like find a little bit of nationalism.
It was hilarious because so many people until now haven't seen the irony of that situation, which is that Justin Trudeau for 10 years has been saying we're a post-national nation. We don't have an identity. The only value we have is openness and inclusion. And so Trump's like, well, if you don't have an identity, then why don't we'll just take you, because you don't seem to care about your identity anyways. It was kind of deeply ironic, but in some ways it's sad because Trump is really the cause of the last election. It's really because of what Trump said that the liberals won again. They were on the verge of disappearing from the electoral map. Like they had the lowest approval rating, a party, I think it was like in the teens at some point. And so they were on the verge, they were on the way out, and they were able to pivot Trump's words and use them as a way to scare Canadians and find, and reelect the same people back into power, just with a different head.
Have they, I've heard like overtures that they're kind of moderating at least the immigration
They
stuff.
have to. No, they kind of have to. I think Kanye he's a smart guy. He's going to have to moderate. They remove the carbon tax. They in some ways, they are going to reduce immigration. They're going to do that. They're going to try to moderate, at least for a while, because if not, their government's isn't going to survive, right? Because the government here can fall. It's not like it's 4 years for sure. The government can be canceled at some point.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a minority government, which it is. It means that it has to, if the other parties aren't happy enough, they can gang up and then call what's called a non-confidence vote, and then ultimately dissolve the government.
Yeah.
And call it a new election. That can happen like now. It could happen anytime.
I have a dangerous question. So I'm sorry, and we can cut it out, or you can avoid it. Or whatever.
What's a dangerous question?
Well, in America, we are particularly enamored with a particular state that has very deep biblical roots. There was a recent interview between Tucker Carlson, who's kind of a podcaster now, just like you or me, just a normal dude, and Senator Ted Cruz. And Ted Cruz said that Christians owe their allegiance to this state of the state of Israel, and he obfuscated about what that state means. Does it mean it in like the first few chapters of Genesis, or do they mean the modern state and how it's formed? It's very interesting that while we're struggling with national identity, there is this country that has such a strong identity, and it's able to maintain its identity, and its identity is even supported by American Christians more than our own country. Mm-hmm. It's almost, and I was at ARCS, and it seemed like Israel at ARCS has a special place. Mm-hmm. When you guys. Or when that conference was talking about saving the West, the line was drawn at Israel. It was Judeo-Christian. The line was drawn there. That was the inflection point. And some people even go so far to say if Israel falls, the West falls. I'm wondering, what do we do? It's very easy to have a strong reaction, negative strong reaction to this modern state with modern people, with normal people having such power over politics, over my country. But there's that deep level of symbolism that I also have to respect, because it does inform like the core of my culture. Yeah. I'm wondering, how do you have like suggestions to how one engages with that?
Yeah, it is a very difficult question, Benjamin, because you can tell, like, it's true that when you listen to the Tucker Carlson interview with Ted Cruz, you know, it was funny because he framed it as, this is what I learned in Sunday school, right? He kind of framed it as this very kind of naive, simple thing that I believe that is in the Bible. But the idea of this idea of the modern state of Israel, and the relationship between that belief, right, the belief that we have to owe our allegiance to Israel in what we call dispensationalism. It's a very modern Christian phenomena. There's a relationship between that and the existence of the state, right? Because it was some of those evangelicals that were very strong Zionists in America that obviously didn't. It's not the only thing that led to the formation of the state, but it was a pressure, within the different powers to kind of bring about the existence of the state. And so, there's a weird irony in what he said, which is that in some ways it's his belief, dispensationalism, one of the reasons that brought about the very existence of the state. And then he says that that's the Israel in the Bible that I have to kind of give my allegiance to. The whole situation is, it's related to World War II. Like, that's the way of understanding it. It's related to, in some ways, the mythology of World War II and what happened during World War II and the consequences of it. In some ways, and it's all kind of crashing now, and it's called kind of collapsing, which is why I think it's important that we talk about it so that we avoid the worst. But the story of what happened at the end of World War II is kind of crashing. So think about it this way. So think about it like, in some ways, the sin of the Nazis, of this kind of extreme unity, right? This desire to eliminate the exception, and this desire, this desire for purity, this desire to eliminate the exception, this desire in some ways to eliminate what they viewed as the problem, right, of the fact of Jews in Europe. That is the idea that there were a group of people in Europe that had an allegiance that was different. Like, in some ways, that they had a different allegiance than the national allegiance or the ethnic allegiance that the Nazis felt they were part of. And that in order to settle that, they're like, well, we'll just get rid of them. Like, we'll. I think, was it even early on? I think Hitler said something like, we're gonna get rid of all the Jews of Europe. Like, whether or not he meant killing them at the outset, but he was going to get rid of them. Like, we don't want them here. And so you could say that deep error, right? The error of thinking that you can and you should attain a kind of total purity of anything, right? Of a nation, of any group, of any identity, in some ways led to the opposite, you could say, right? And so it led to a world where there is a type of favor that we attribute to the exception, right? That we kind of have a compassion for the stranger, compassion for the exception, compassion for difference. We see those as being the values that we embody. And that led to a situation, of course, that hadn't been possible for 2,000 years, which is the formation of a state for those people in Europe who truly for 2,000 years had played the official role, you could say, of the stranger among us, right? Of these people that act as strangers among us, that don't have the right to own land, that don't have the same allegiance as us, but we accept, and we also kind of understand the role that they play you could think about it like a kind of mediator, right? A kind of thing that greases the parts. Like, it sounds weird to say it that way, but like, in the sense that you need these buffers between peoples, and you need aspects in the system that relate to the outside, right? That are kind of like bridges and play roles that the normal identity is struggling to play. So all of these roles that aren't, and so this had been in some ways the deal of Europe for thousands of years, to the great difficulty sometimes for the Jews. Let's be honest.
Yeah. But just now on a sub note, was your faith? I mean, and I know there's exceptions and bad things that happen, but did Christianity form some sort of compromise or articulation of the other in Christendom? Is there a proper balance.
Yeah, it's a very the way that think about it this way. This is one of the hardest. This is a rough one to think about, folks. So please pay attention. It's a difficult one. The relationship between Christians and Jews is one which is from the outset, and it's a very deep relationship. It's one that is characterized by some of the strangest reversals in the history of the world. So you let's look at it as a story. So you have the Jews in Jerusalem, and there's this figure, Jesus, that appears, and he's kind of a troublemaker for them. Like he's kind of annoying in their world. But there are a bunch of people that really think that he not only is he the Messiah, but he's literally God in the world. And so the Jews allied themselves with the Romans to kill this character. And then his disciples, they end up persecuting and ultimately rejecting. And they even develop in the first century, they developed a prayer, which is a curse on heretics, in which the Nazarene were named for a very long time. And so they
and the Jews formulated this prayer? Okay. Yeah. That cursed the followers of Christ.
It's a curse on the betrayers, curse on the heretics, called the Berkat Haminim. Okay. And for centuries in the prayer, the Nazarenes were named as like people that had betrayed in some ways Judaism. So here's the situation.
Because of Christ.
Yeah. Sorry?
Because of Jesus.
Yeah, well, because they had wrong beliefs. Like they believed in something that they thought was wrong, like a kind of heresy. And so they persecute this little group. They eject them from the synagogue, right? They don't have a place. They're not allowed to participate in the life of the Jews. And then, weirdly enough, the Romans do two things very important. That one is they also start persecuting these Christians for some reason, very odd reason, because they accuse them of burning the city of Rome. So they start persecuting them. But then the Romans also destroy Jerusalem, eliminate Judaism. That is, there's no more sacrificial system. The temple is done. Everything that the Bible says that Israelites should do to worship God, almost everything, not everything, but a lot of the things become just impossible. You just can't do them because you don't have an altar and you don't have, and so everything is in total chaos and flux, right? So the Romans are persecuting the Christians, the Jews are persecuting the Christians as well to some extent. The Romans destroy Jerusalem, and then the most insane thing in the history of the world happens, which is that the Romans convert to Christianity. Think about it. The Romans destroy Jerusalem. They participate in killing this character, Christ. And now they take up this weird little Jewish sect and they convert to Christianity. So now the tables are completely reversed.
Yeah.
Now the tables are reversed, which means that now the Christians are in power.
Yeah.
And now what happens with the Jews? That's the question.
Hold on. From your telling, is it the same Christianity when it catapults from the Nazarene to Rome? It's still the same Christianity.
Yeah. It's important to see it as the narrative. Like you have to see it as a story that's happening, right? As these movements in a story. All right. So now the question is, what do we do? Like what happens? So the Christians in time eliminate all the other religions. All the cults disappear, right? Yeah. Zeus, nobody worships Zeus anymore. Nobody worships all of these old gods. Like they just get eliminated except one. Which
Yahweh.
one? Which one gets exactly? And so the only religion from the ancient world that is preserved by the Christians is Judaism. Why? And this is where it gets rough, folks. And and I'm not saying this to defend anything, but this is where it gets rough. And the why is for two reasons. The first reason is Romans 11, this idea that in some ways, St. Paul talks about how the branch was cut from the tree. He says, in certain ways, Judaism was cut from the tree, and that Christians were put in its place. And St. Paul says, be careful, don't boast about that. Don't think it's because of you. Don't think you have anything to do with it. Because who's to say that one day God won't put the other branch back, And so there's a sense in which Christians have this relationship with Jews that is a kind of kinship or a common history, something that they share together, which makes Christians preserve preserved Jews. But there's another one, which is darker, which is St. Augustine, for example, talks about how the Jews in some ways are like Cain, and that they killed their brother, and now they're preserved like with a mark in a way that to their shame, you could say. And so they're preserved in their shame. And so those are the two things that happen. But it's a weird thing. Like, it's not like anybody decided this.
Yeah.
But that's what happens. And then
there's a deep attraction and repulsion within the Christian and within Europe, within the West, towards the Jew. It's both a deep attraction and a deep repulsion. You can see it all the time. Yeah. And I think people go too overboard on the anti-Semitism part because they forget that's counterbalanced by this deep reverence at the same time.
Yeah, and so what that sets up in some ways is a system, you could say, of identities where the Christians represent the center and the Jews represent the accepted margin, like the accepted stranger, the stranger that is that has a place, in the system, but that place isn't complete, right? And so when that stranger is a nuisance, it's easy to get rid of them. Like, it's easy to chase them out. If the Jews become too powerful, for all kinds of reasons, then the Jews can be chased out without any consequence, because they don't have an army, they don't have a land, they don't have power in the military sense. Sometimes they end up with financial power, but that's not the same as guns and swords. And so it creates this long story, like a very, very long story, where in some ways the Jewish population represents the stranger in Europe, right?
Yeah.
So now fast forward to the end of World War II, where in some ways that extreme relationship, like where this idea of the Jewish nation as a stranger in Europe gets taken to the extreme where we're going to eliminate them. We want to get rid of them completely. And because of that, once we take a step back from that and we stop that from happening, as the West, as America, as Western Europe, then normally there is a kind of tendency to have favor for the stranger, for the exception, for difference, for all of these things. And that leads to the formation of the state of Israel to some extent. It's part of why it is that we accept this new state to be born. And so Israel becomes an image of where that happens. But now the problem is stories are funny that way, because now Israel in some ways is everything at once. And it's like, as the story plays itself out, as it comes to the end, you have this weird situation where the two narratives about what Israel is are kind of clashing together, right? So you could say, because we have this favor for the stranger and for difference and for exception, the idea of nation and of identity and of authority in the West became more and more suspicious as time went on. And so as the 60s come and the 80s and 90s, now everything's fascist, right? Any identity becomes fascist. Family is fascist. Nation is fascist. Everything except one, right? Except Israel, because Israel was born out of the desire to give land to the excluded, right? The desire to give land to those that had no land for thousands of years. But the thing is that now the people in this land also start to act in ways that are nationalistic, that are tribal, that are identitarian. And so, like I said, the two stories clash. So on the one hand, the extreme right type people that are saying, okay, why is it that we're not allowed our ethne? Why is it that we're not allowed our tribe? And they're the only ones that are allowed their tribe. And so in some ways, there's a kind of anger and resentment because they have the tribe and we can't. Yeah. And then from the other side, the extreme left, they start to see how, because they do have ethne, tribe, and nation, they're starting to act like an ethne, tribe, and nation. And so now they resent them for acting like the things that they hate, acting like the fascists, acting like, all the things in identity that we hate. So you have two sides hating Israel for opposite reasons, you could say. Yeah. But then like coming in and crashing back. That's why I keep saying, like, people who think that Israel isn't the center of the world, like, stop deluding yourselves, folks. Like, Jerusalem is the center of the world. It's the narrative center of the world. And whatever is going to happen in the future, however this is going to play out, it's there that it's going to play out. First, the story will change there. I don't know how the story is going to get resolved, but
yeah,
there's no way around that.
Yeah,
like there's no way around that. And people wonder, like, you can hear people from all sides saying, why do we care so much about what happened there?
Yeah.
You know, it's like there are millions of Uyghurs in concentration camps in China getting slaughtered. And we don't talk about that. There are hundreds of thousands of people in concentration camps in North Korea, and nobody talks about that. But it's like what happens there has all our attention all the time, because for reasons that are thousands of years old, Jerusalem is the center of the world, and it's the center of the story. And you can pretend that it's not, but it just is. It's just going to play out that way.
So you did a beautiful thing by explaining it this way, because now we can relate it backwards with symmetry. So there's these two stories about Israel. One is the exception, and then one is the
tyrant, or something like that.
The tyrant, yeah.
It's like the exception and the tyrant. You can see it as these two weird stories that are just smashing into each other.
Matches on perfectly to your two versions of Christ, the crucified and the king. What is the mystery there? How is that? How does Christianity solve that tension?
Yeah. Well, Christianity, you could say that there is a difference. There is a similarity and a difference. Is that you could say that, how can I say this? It's like Christ is the judge because he gives himself. And those two, it's as if those two have to be, one has to be caused by the other. And so you could say that because Christ washes our feet, like because Christ serves us, because he gives himself, because his will and his authority is given in service of those around him, then that is the reason why he is accepted as the supreme king. It's like, and those two things go together. And so in some ways, the images are similar, but in Christ you find the resolution, right? Which is that, if we had an absolute leader, but we knew 100% that absolute leader does everything in love for his people and does everything out of a desire to see everybody in the kingdom, grow, then we'd say, of course we want an absolute leader, right? It's Plato's philosopher king. It's like, and so this is the image that we see in Christ in some ways, is that those two images kind of are brought together.
Mm-hmm. Is there a possibility for a political Christianity?
Is there a possibility for, I think that there's no way around the fact that there is a kind of political Christianity. There's always been, it's a tension, it definitely exists in tension. And you see that. So like if you look at the ideal of the knight, for example, you kind of get a sense of what political Christianity could look like if it was done properly, which is truly the idea of someone who fights and puts his strength to the service of those that can't fight and those that can't defend themselves, and so when that happens, and then when that's not done cynically and kind of with manipulation, then you can understand how political Christianity could exist. But obviously some people definitely use that as a trope to manipulate events.
Yeah. It's the conversation we're having is so difficult. I mean, I've been warned quite sternly away from it. Not quite a threat, but pretty close.
Really?
Yeah.
To not talk about what?
To not talk to people. I think the threat was so veiled. It was like you're talking to people who have these ideas, and you might have the same ideas. There's this. Anti-Semitism is a really damaging political thing.
But one of the things that's happening now, and I think that that's something that it's important to warn against, is that, like I said at the outset, because now I think that this story, like the kind of World War II consensus, this idea of how we value the exception, we value diversity, we value the weak, has kind of run into a tyrannical mode, right? And so it's like you kind of move a story along, and then at some point the side effects of the story start to show. And so people are starting to see that, okay, wait a minute, like this kind of allies idea of, a ragtag federation of people that don't have true unity is an interesting idea, but it also has side effects if you push it too far. And like, by the time you push it too far, you get with the flag with so many colors on it that you don't know how to even keep it in your memory. Like there's no even way to keep it in your memory. So the whole kind of Rainbow Coalition stuff is downstream from that. Like it is a consequence of favoring diversity and difference and exception. And it's not to say that it's bad to do that. It's definitely good to do that. But everything, if not in balance, becomes excessive. And so one of the dangers we're seeing now is that people are saying, oh, wait a minute, that led to this, right? So people can see it. They're like, oh, in some ways, some of the things, let's say, that the fascists warned us against, which is this kind of weird, degenerate chaos, happened, right? And so now what it means is that, well, maybe they were right on everything, or maybe they were the true heroes. Like you see that in a lot of the weird, in some of the weirder corners of the internet. But that is ridiculous. Like that's it's like, it's a kind of naive thinking to think that because a certain direction has side effects and those side effects play themselves out, then it means that the other direction is pure. That's ridiculous. The other direction also has all of these side effects. And so like emphasizing an excess of purity, is no better than emphasizing an excess of diversity. Like those two things have to dance with each other. That's how the world works. And so there is a danger now. So I get what some people are saying. Well, don't talk to some of these people, because there is a tendency to want to say, oh, well, maybe we got it wrong. Like maybe the devil's actually the good guy, and it's like, well, that's not right.
Yeah. But, you've talked a lot about the re-enchantment of the world, and yet, in a sense, we have to disenchant these stories. We have to destigmatize the stigma of the Nazi in order to move past it, which is kind of the work. Okay, I know. I know. Like, it's like what
destigmatize the Nazi. I think that what's going on
in order to move past it.
Yeah, but the thing is that we do need a enchanted mythological structure to hold the world together. There's no doubt about it. The problem with the one that we have now is that it in some ways is insufficient, that it's not enough. Obviously, like I've said in my own videos, Hitler was an evil person for sure, but he's not worse than the devil. Like you can't hold that on forever. Like you can't have Hitler play the devil for our world for 1,000 years. That's just not going to happen.
Oh, the 1,000-year Reich. He got what he wanted.
Yeah, he got what he wanted. He got to be the devil for 1,000 years, but it's not going to happen. Like you can't, that can't work. At some point, some of this stuff has to be reintegrated. I don't know how, I don't know how it's going to happen, but it kind of has to be reintegrated, because one of the problems that's happened, right? I talked to you about how, because of the trauma of World War II, like because of the trauma of the Holocaust, and not just that, but also the secret, which is the fact that we allied ourselves with communists in order to beat the fascists. Because of that, in some ways, what happened is it's a narrative pressure, right? So what happened is that anything that's on the fascist side is completely out of the picture. Like you can't engage it, you can't mention it, you can't refer to it. But there's a weakness for the other side, right? So there's a kind of little openness that sets itself up where things on the other side slowly start to infiltrate our culture, right? So you can have a communist flag for sure, but you can't have a Nazi flag. Like,
yeah, there's a communist emoji. There's no swastika emoji.
exactly. So that is so what. But it shows you like what, in some ways, like the narrative pressure opened up the space, and what it's done. Not only that, but it's made it that anything that's on the right, you could say, right? There's no right. There's only far right. You've heard that many times, right?
Yeah.
It's like everything on the right is far right because there is a reality to that opposition, right? And so you can take anything on the right and trace it through 1 or 2 or 3 or 20 steps to the Nazis. And if you're able to do that, then you can cancel things on the right because you can say, well, it's it's not racism, but it's the adjacent. Priority of family.
That was the thing in 2018. Right? Alt-right adjacent.
Yeah, right. Adjacent. That's
yeah.
right. You remember that? All right, adjacent. So you can make everything adjacent until being a father with children is a Nazi thing. Until any
working
loving
out,
your own nation,
walking in
like
nature,
singing your national anthem is a Nazi thing, right? So you can keep doing that, but that's not sustainable, right? You can't keep eliminating things that are related to identity. Like you just can't. Because identity is part of the world. Like we need identities in order to function. And you can't just open the space up for revolutionary identity, an upside down identity, and a kind of a type of equality that leads to chaos, because that can't hold either. So we have to be able to reintegrate some element. I don't know how to do it, but it has to happen, or else the world can't always lurch left, because that's what's been happening since World War II, is that the West, what it does, it just inevitably lurches left, because everything that's on the right can be adjacent until I tell you can't quote Heidegger, because obviously you can't quote Heidegger. You can't quote anybody who was a student of Heidegger, and then you can't, and it just keeps going like that, where it's like at some point you're doomed, because if when Jordan Peterson now says make your bed, he's a Nazi, because order, right? Mm-hmm. Right, so it's like you can't that can't sustain itself. You can't keep going in this direction.
Well, is there? So Kanye, you did the video because he had to, about his track. When I first heard that, I was rather blown away, because he had done something to release the tension around that phrase, right? And he put it to this really ascending scale. It was very clever how he did it. It was like, whoa, you did that. And then he had the chanting going on, like, wow, that's really magnificent. But he's playing the role of the devil, or the fool of the devil. But you also did a video about Lil Nas or whatever, who was he's a homosexual rap star or whatever, and he did it very explicitly devilish thing. So and somebody, when Kanye dropped his track, there was some dust up about saying, if he had sang Hail Satan, nobody would have cared.
No, of course not.
Right? But so we need a devil in some sense. Doesn't our mythological architecture require a devil? And what's the foundation of finding the correct devil?
Well, it's not something that you can analyze into the world. It's going to happen. Okay. It's things that happen in the world. But that whole idea is an interesting one. Like, because one of the things about stories is they have a certain pressure in a certain direction, and you can't in some ways stop what happens. My brother talks about what he calls the double inversion. In this case, you can actually see this kind of weird flipping that happens in the case of this story, which is that you set up a structure in which ultimately what happens is that you set up this structure of the exception and of the rebellion, right? So after World War II, the image of the rebellion and the exception and the margins and the stranger and all of that become the main story. Then it turns into rock and roll, it turns into all this stuff. And then that secretly the hero of that story is the devil, right? And so it's like it turns into satanic rock and this idea that ultimately there's a sense of like a kind of understanding that the devil is the hero of that story because he's the one who rebels against authority, right? And now Milton's devil all of a sudden becomes the hero, right?
Yeah.
He's like standing against the oppressor and he's standing up. And then by the time you're done, you have a series on Netflix called Lucifer, and it's like Lucifer is literally the main character of the story, and he's this kind of represents all of our passions and our desires and all that stuff, right? So you kind of set up this weird situation where in some ways the devil becomes the kind of inevitable hero of the story, but then at the same time what you're doing is you're casting this other character as the devil, right? So you're casting this mustachio guy as the devil, and he's the devil and it's a devil, but you don't realize that you're setting up the very structure in which at some point you keep pushing this guy into hell, but you keep saying the devil is the one to be celebrated, that things are going to flip. And then at some point, the devil's going to come out of the woodworks again, and it's not going to be the devil you thought, right? It's going to be the one you pushed into hell for 50 years.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's what happened in some ways with Kanye. It's like, he's like, well, I'm the bad one. I'm the bad guy now. I'm the devil now. Like, what's the marginalized now? Who are marginalized now? Who are the ones that are excluded and marginalized from society? Who are they? And now it's their turn for revolution. And it's like, and then everything turns upside down. Like everything is totally topsy-turvy because now like the most punk thing is to have a family. Now the most rebellious thing is to be normal. The
most corporatized thing is punk rock. Like they're the ones who are telling you have to accept everybody and like they're the ones.
Right. So it's like this thing. And so it's like the mechanisms in the story itself are leading towards some kind of reversal. But the thing is that we don't want the devil to come. Like, I don't want the devil to become the hero. I didn't like it when it was Anton LaVey's Milton's Satan, and I don't like it when it's Hitler either. It's like we don't have to be like, people don't have to become the Ozzy Osbournes of the World War II consensus. They don't. That's not necessary. There are better ways to integrate this stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, even the people who are seriously endeavoring to reestablish something in a post-World War II consensus, like the people who are the people on the right or the people on the not left that are reaching out past this thing called liberalism. Mm-hmm. If they adopt rebellion, then they're just following the same thing. Yeah, so they can't even obey as an act of rebellion. You have to actually obey.
I never ever used the intellectual dark web thing. Like I never wanted to use that term. Because that's exactly right. Like you can't, if you're trying to reestablish something,
if you're the outsider,
you're not dark. You're not like how can
dissident.
I say that? You're not the dissident, right? You're not the dissident.
Rebel wisdom. Yeah.
Was it the heretics? Like Pinker had the new heretics and all this stuff. Like no, that doesn't work.
Wrong think. Yeah.
Wrong. Yeah. All that is like. So it's a
trigonometry. We could go on and on and on.
We can on and on. Yeah. So how, and look, you know what I'm gonna do, Benjamin, is I'm gonna tell fairy tales. That's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's like, because I think I know people are going to think like, okay, how the hell did you get to fairy tales, Jonathan? But it's like, that's it. Like, I think that
Christ the preschool teacher, dude, you can't escape it. You can't escape it.
No, it's mostly the idea of the only thing we can do is celebrate the beauty of the things we care about, and that's the real thing we need to do. It's like, if you retell these stories with a kind of power, and if you raise your children right, and you teach them about the beauty of their traditions, of their past, and their origins, that's a far more powerful thing we can do than this kind of weird fake rebellion thing, this dissident whatever it is.
I'm just like my imagination's trying to engage with fairy tales, and fairy tales, at least the grimmer ones, articulate darkness, articulate evil. Something that I realized in my investigations into transition and detransition, especially among youth and the parents of these teenagers who all of a sudden come home and think that their identity is completely different, and then demand that all these steps are taken, that the parents confronted with this absolute reversal of reality. Well-to-do, affluent liberals all the way up to that moment, like everything is progress all the way up to that moment, and they realized, or I realized in them, that they had no way to articulate evil. They had Disneyfied the world, so that I guess Hitler even became a cartoon. Like they had no notion of what darkness and evil is, what the wolf is. And in the fairy tale, it can articulate evil. It can articulate the devil in a variety of forms without making an idol out of the devil, without concentrating or totalizing the devil, which is what I think we've done. You brought up earlier about this extremism that is constantly going back and forth, and it's a narrative. I see it in feminism too. My greatest critique of feminism is basically that it's a bad story. It doesn't their relationship to the articulation of man and woman it's flawed. It's inept, actually. Beyond flawed, it's inept. Like they don't have a strong articulation of gender, and so gender got robbed once they
got taken
broke
from
gender.
Them. That's right.
It got taken from them.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly
so in fairy tales, I think there's a lesson on how to relate to the darkness, how to relate to the devil, in a variety of forms, in a broad form. So even the tyrant is not necessarily the incarnation of evil. It can't be the incarnation of evil. It actually warns you away from incarnation in a strict sense by opening your narrative faculties to be able to see the patterns on a deeper level.
Yeah, I think so. I think that for sure, one of the things that these types of stories can do, the fairy tales, is they can integrate different elements of the world. And so you can see it because in some ways you can tell that Disney doesn't like the fairy tales anymore. Obviously they hate them. And so they're trying to just fit them into this weird mold. But if you actually look at the fairy tales per se and how the types of stories they tell, they actually encompass all of reality together, right? One of the things that we're doing now is we publish a version of Snow White, and now we're publishing a version of Rapunzel. And I'm trying to show people how, in fact, Snow White and Rapunzel are like opposites, right? Because on the one hand, you have the queen that ejects the young girl, out of jealousy, ejects her from the castle, puts her in danger to be raped and to be kind of destroyed in the forest. Whereas the other one, it's the opposite, right? It's like the witch that keeps the young girl in the tower and preserves her from any danger, anything that happens. And so you have these two extremes, but both of them are telling you about reality. They're two evils that are, in some ways, one is the opposite of the other, but you can also see the evil in the extreme. And I think that those kinds of stories, and those are the stories in the Bible too. The Bible has that too, where in some ways it lays out a fullness, right? A kind of layered fullness of the world where you can identify, let's say, two sides: the good side of one side and the bad side of the same side, and the other way around.
Even when you're thinking of the Bible, like the Pharaoh, Nebuchadnezzar, all of the tyrants in the Bible, they're not like Hitler. They're never made to be the devil. God is always above them.
Yeah, but not only that, but you can read, it's like when you read the story of the Pharaoh, you can actually read it from his point of view. If you're a little attentive, you can realize that, obviously I take for the Israelites, but Pharaoh's not completely unreasonable and not wanting to let them go. And they're telling him, well, we need to take all of our stuff, like everything, the animals, the children, for 3 days. I promise we'll be back. Pharaoh's like, no, I don't think you're going to be back. Like, you can't do that. So you can kind of read it from the point of view of the Pharaoh and understand it. And it's the same with all the Bible stories. You can actually read it from all these different points of view. And there isn't this kind of simplistic vision. And that might be in some ways the way to go for this kind of World War II world, where there should be a little bit of a space to be able to consider, the point of view of the other side without giving into it, without saying, well, I've taken the side of my enemy, but rather at least leave room open. In the Middle Ages, for example, there's this whole idea in the Crusades where in some ways there was an honoring of certain aspects of the enemy, right? Where you kind of recognize the valor, even though you were fighting them, even though you disagreed with them, you were able to recognize some quality in them. There's this whole tradition of the ancient world, which is called the Nine Worthies. And it's this idea that there are these political figures in the past, and there are 9 of them, 3 from the Old Testament, 3 from antiquity, and 3 from the modern world. And for example, like Alexander the Great, is one of the 9 worthies. But when you read the description of Alexander the Great, they'll say, here's the great thing that Alexander did. Here's the sin that Alexander portrayed, like exemplified. And then they're trying to show that, in fact, it's like all of these worthies, they also had a dark side. And we have to be able to see the light and the dark side of our allies and our enemies, so that we have a more layered vision of the world. So it doesn't mean that we're still not going to fight our enemies. But if we make them fully into the devil, one of the problems that's going to happen is that, well, like what we're seeing now, is that in some ways it becomes our shadow, like in a Jungian way. And at some point that shadow starts to show up in all these kind of weird manners. And until we find ways to integrate it, we're in trouble.
Yeah. No, when Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, I believe, or another one of his studies came out, and he had that distribution that says people on the right basically have more, a broader bandwidth of values than people on the left, and people on the left like have a very small bandwidth. They prioritize, like, I can't remember exactly what it was.
Justice.
But justice and equality or fairness, I think it was,
fairness
right?
and equality.
And then when I'm like, well, that's really interesting, but I went through Evergreen, and they were incredibly, like, purity spirals is something that defined this group who put all their eggs into the faith basket, and then loyalty became hyper policed. And then when you see this progressive world progressing where there's no boundaries, and then it starts to enforcing, you can't step out of your home, you have to wear a mask, you have to be like, and then boundaries kind of come up with an absolute vengeance at the same time.
But that's the way to understand it, is that the real world is the real world. Like, if you keep pushing in one direction, it's like the other side is just there waiting, and it'll happen in all these kind of perverse ways. Like you said, in some ways, you don't realize that as you're pushing for equality, what ends up happening is that if you push for equality, what you end up setting up is an inverted hierarchy. So you're reintroducing hierarchy into the system because you can't have just equality. Equalizing tendencies in a system are necessary, but you cannot have a system that is equal. That is ridiculous. Systems, by definition, all systems, like families, all systems are hierarchical in nature, although they do need equalizing tendencies in them. And so it's like, that's just how it is. If you keep pushing in one direction, at some point, and it's the same, like, it's the Tower of Babel motif is a good way of thinking about it, right? The Tower of Babel has those two tendencies in it. It's like, you want to build this one tower, we're going to reach heaven, we're going to make a name for ourselves, we're going to be a fully united people, right? And then as you do that, the fragility starts to manifest itself, and then the unity collapses into total fragmentation. And so you could think about those two tendencies. You could say that the other way would be true as well. Like, if you tried to push for absolute diversity and absolute difference, then at the end of that would be another tyranny.
Yeah, crystallization.
Exactly.
Just everything snaps into place.
I think that those two, the image of the Tower of Babel is a good way to think of the tendencies that actually usually have to be balanced together, like breathing in and breathing out. Like, there has to be just a gentle moving towards one, a gentle moving towards the many, and at every level, so that you find this kind of rhythm of being that doesn't crystallize on one side or the other.
Yeah. A mutual friend is probably too strong of a word at this point for you, at least, but a mutual friend of ours, James Lindsay, has been going really hard against this concept that he sees, and I don't see it. It's called the woke right. He's really worried about something on the right. And it's very, from my point of view, it's very muddled, but there is nobody's without flaw, and the right isn't one thing for me. I mean, the right is literally the not left. Like the left is very very standardized in its values. It's very very strong in its values, even though it values difference. It has a very strong tight collection of beliefs. But the right is just spread out. It's like you go from the center into all these different conversations going on and these different movements out here, and they can go further or closer, to the center or to the left, or like there's a lot of disaffected liberals who I think that they kind of secretly want to have control back. They used to have control, and they like the left me. They're like, no, I'm the real left. But now they're thrust out into the darkness with like the traditionalists and the neo-reactionaries and the monarchists and all these other things. But there is it's really easy to overstate the danger of the right going too far. I don't think it's possible for America to go fascist in a 1930s Germany sense, because the landmass is just like the politics don't really work out. The landmass doesn't really work out. But there is a danger for the human individual of going too far, whatever right means.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, I think whoever implements the narrative for the next generation is he who wins. Actually, that's the only political game in town, is the next generation. Yeah. And you, through your work and through the opportunities afforded to you, I know that you're engaging with a broad swath of people. I'm wondering what you sense is that which is the proper thing to give to young men. Yeah. Like, what is that?
Well, first thing to say is there is this liberal center, supposedly, it's lacking in a very simple way. It's lacking identity. It's lacking the reason why we exist together. That's the thing that the liberals are lacking.
Yeah. And so every time they try to define it, they have to redefine it. Like, nationalism's bad, but patriotism is good, and they have to play around with all these word games. And I can never grasp it. Yeah. It's like barbecue and beer. I don't know.
Liberalism is based on the idea of individual rights, and that individual rights are the foundation, and a kind of individual sovereignty is the foundation. Liberty. Of all that, and that's a good thing. Like, I want to be careful. Like, obviously that's a good thing that we have that, but the problem is that it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. Individual rights and that type of liberty is not sufficient. There has to be a reason, especially at a post, how can I say this? Like a transpersonal level, right? At a level that is beyond people, you need to have reasons why you exist together and why you function as groups. And those cannot, I'm sorry to say, cannot be ideals. Because if they're ideals, if we say that the reason for America is its ideals, right? Its defense of freedom and liberty and democracy. If you say that, then you have absolutely no defense against globalism. Because who's to say at what level those ideals should be celebrated? So if we could all have liberty and democracy, then why not just have a one world government? There's no reason for nations in your definition of what your nation based on ideals is. There's absolutely none. And so if you nonetheless, as a liberal, think nations are important, and you think that smaller groups are important, you have to find a way to formulate the unity. And that unity is more like unity of purpose, unity of origin, unity of common history, common foundation, common conflicts, right? So how did the Greeks start to exist? Well, they started to exist because they all went together to fight the Trojans. And now they were able to consolidate themselves into an identity because they opposed someone else. So that's all rough stuff. Like, I'm not saying this is all fun and games, but if you can't formulate that, then if you think you're defending yourself against globalism, you're not. You're actually just like part of the slide right into globalism. That's why I believe that Enlightenment liberalism leads exactly to where we are now. right? It leads exactly to the situation that we're in, and so we need to find ways to unify. And what you're seeing on the right is a kind of bubbling about people trying to find a way to anchor ourselves. And so they're saying nation, they're saying,
Religion,
Christianity,
ethnicity,
they're saying race, they're saying all these different things. And some of them, are like, oh, no, not that one. Oh, not that one. But there has to be
one.
Or else why are we together? And there probably has to be several that a stack, you could say. So in the way that traditional Europe functioned in the Middle Ages was Christianity was the highest, right? Christianity isn't sufficient because there's a big difference between an Irish Christian and a Sicilian Christian. Like, let's be honest, if you can't just put them together and think that because they're Christian they're all going to get together. And so there was a kind of fractal relationship. There was a unity in the church at the top as this kind of thing that was in some ways unified and international. It was almost like a globalist thing where all these people spoke Latin in Western Europe and they all kind of could communicate with each other at a higher level. And then you also had different nations, different ethnic groups with different common histories, common struggles, common stories. And it seems like that kind of empire structure seems to be the one that is the least crazy, like the one that leads to the least problems. Because if you're at least know that my neighbors share some values in common with me, like you might fight with them, but you're not going to fight with them to the elimination. You're not going to fight with them to to a complete, genocidal tendency. And so it seems to me like we have to find. That's why I wrote that paper with Jordan Peterson on subsidiarity as what I think is the best structure for our society, which is the idea that we form identities at every level, and all those identities have a concrete, real existence, but they also have to be fitted into higher identities. They have to kind of scaffold into higher identities.
It makes me think, and I hope you can maybe flesh this out if you're interested in doing so, that when Christianity spread through Europe, it did dismantle all the old gods, but it didn't. But you can see the old gods inside of Christianity. Like it came in. They also get
reincorporated. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same with all the traditions and all of it's like there's a way in which Christianity kind of cleans up, but then brings a lot of the characteristics of the old world back into itself. And I think that it actually is a characteristic of Christianity. People say, "Oh, Christianity is just paganism with a veneer." It's like, no, that's part of Christianity was to reintegrate the Roman civilization, then ultimately the northern people, and all these people back together in a way that respected their tribal realities, but also joined it with others. And that happens in the story, by the way. It happens narratively. So when the Scandinavians convert to Christianity, one of the things that happens in their own mythology is that they connect themselves to Troy, interestingly enough. So they have this idea that one of the founders of their tradition is a Trojan prince, and then they also connect themselves to Noah. It's like the fourth son of Noah or something like that. He's the one who founded. So even mythologically, they're saying we are this. But here's how we connect to all of you. Like, here's a manner in which we also share some commonality.
Yeah. Because when you talk about all these interlocking identities, it sounds just like paganism. It's like there's a shrine, there's a shrine in my house, and then there's a shrine down my block, and then there's a shrine at the center of the city, and then there's this empirical shrine, but every shrine has its place. It's articulated in such a way where how we worship or revere all these different identities that's the art that we need to relearn. It's not to deny my whiteness, but it's not to be proud of my whiteness, but to recognize that this ethnicity is very deep inside of me, and I cannot deny my ancestors. But I have to, like, there's a shrine there on some level.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But I think that's why the thing that makes it different from paganism, you could say, is that there's a tendency in paganism for the gods to fight with each other. And so what happens in Christianity in some ways is that we have a common head, right? We say, okay, so the highest God, the one that founds everything else, is the God of infinite love, right? That is the origin of all things, that gave himself completely to us in a gesture of sacrifice. And by, in some ways, I call it kenotic identity, right? In the sense that the top of identity in some ways isn't something solid and really strong that controls and rules over everything else. It's actually something that yields and gives itself back, right? And so because of that, it's like now what we have this idea, for example, in Roman times, the paterfamilias had absolute tyrannical control over the family, right? He could decide everything about everyone there, and he owned pretty much everybody in the family and his slaves and could do whatever he wanted. Whereas in Christianity, the idea of the father is different. It's like, yes, he is the head of the household and he does in some ways have authority over the household, but only to the extent that he also is there to give himself to his wife and to his children in love and in service. And so it's not like you destroy the hierarchy, but you make the hierarchy something which then gives itself back into the system. And so I think that's why there is a difference between the Christian structure and the pagan structure.
I want to wrap up, let you go on, but you mentioned the Lord of Hosts. In so many words, you brought up like the infinite bounty of the living God, who's I'm very fond of God myself, and you have a rich and faith practice. I wonder if there's something from the liturgy or your reading or your church going that recently just kind of knocked your socks off. Like something that you were given in your faith.
Yeah.
Like really.
I mean, it actually relates to what it is we're saying here, you know. And so there's an interesting thing that happens in the liturgy, right? So in the liturgy, we in some ways, you know, are worshiping God, but there's also a sense in which we're also honoring different saints, you know, we're honoring different feasts, and we're also kind of being called in some ways to participate in this Holy Communion, right? We're being called in some ways participate in the life of God, and so there's this sense in which we're kind of moving into the life of God as we're going to enter into communion. But then there's this, so we will pray to the Virgin, of course, we pray to the saints, we do all these things. But then there's this moment in the liturgy where all of a sudden the priest says, one is holy, one is God. And then the congregation, the church says, Jesus Christ, to the glory of God the Father, amen. All right. And so it's really fascinating because we, during the whole service, we're like calling all these people saints and talking about the holiness of different things. But then there's this moment where it culminates and it's like, okay, all of this is true, but remember the one, right? Remember that this is the highest truth. And I think that the capacity for Christianity to be able to formulate that, to say all these things down here, they exist. They're not an illusion. They're not Maya. They're not like just a projection. They actually exist. But the only one that truly exists is God, right? And so it's not, so I think that beautiful like paradox, but it's not a paradox. And it's a paradox, but it also, you kind of get it when you see it. You're like, yeah, well, of course, you know, for things to exist down here, there has to be a truly existence one that kind of yields them and makes them exist. But it doesn't deny the existence of my life, of my family, of my nation, and all of that. So I think that's a beautiful moment in the liturgy that always kind of strikes me because it reminds us of the one, you know.
Last time we spoke, you, if I recall correctly, you were having you're questioning your work online. You're like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know. Right now, you seem very engaged with whatever it is you're doing. What are you engaged with right now?
Well, I think people can find it. I think the thing I care about the most about right now is the stories we're telling, and so I think that's giving me joy because at some point I started to feel like all I was doing was commenting on everything, which I think is fine. There's nothing wrong with commenting, but the fact that we started this press called Symbolic World Press, and we're kind of retelling these fairy tales with beautiful illustrations. We're also now giving courses on the website, so it's not just kind of commenting on social events or commenting, but it's also kind of teaching certain things. We did Dante's Divine Comedy, kind of went through the text with people, kind of helping them see what it's about. I just did a symbolism masterclass. So all of that feels more like we're building. And I think that's what I love. So people can go to the symbolicworld.com and you'll see all the stuff, the videos, the courses, the books, and everything that we're trying to do to not only criticize the state of culture, but actually, build something.
Yeah. Is there an Orthodox Dante? Dostoevsky, maybe? I don't know.
Dostoevsky, yeah. I mean, he's definitely a modern Dante. Nobody's like Dante, though, man. Dante just
was that particular to Christianity, you think, or just him? I mean, Catholicism produced Dante.
Yeah, I think that Dante obviously is in some ways kind of builds on all these other texts and all these other traditions that are from the past. And so he's very particular because he just brings it all together in ways that is very beautiful. Yeah. So he's definitely hard to beat. Dante's hard to beat.
Yeah, but is there someone from the East, Christian
in the Orthodox tradition?
Yeah, that reached towards the epic. There probably are some Greek epics in the Byzantine East, but they're not really that known to us, which is kind of sad. And so a lot of them have been translated. They aren't very known because of the Enlightenment and how in some ways it kind of had a disparaging vision on the Byzantine East. And so in terms of like fiction, I don't think so. I think that you could say that the Dante, let's say the Dante-esque aspect or the epic aspect of the East is probably contained in something like, a liturgical year in the Hagia Sophia, right? In the sense that there was this kind of insane like space inhabiting liturgical life, that included the emperor and included, all of that was the epic of the Eastern Church, I believe. But we have very little traces of what it was like. Literature, yeah. Oh wow, cool.
I mean, that the emissaries of Prince Vladimir, before Prince Vladimir converted to Christianity, the story is that they came to Constantinople and the emperor invited them to come see the liturgy in Hagia Sophia, and they went back and said we didn't know if we were in heaven or on earth. Right, that we just couldn't tell, and it's almost impossible to know what that church looked like, before the Muslims destroyed it. You read some of the texts, even of Mehmet when he took over. Somebody was sharing that with me recently when he took over the city, and they describe Hagia Sophia. And they say that everything in the church is covered in precious stones and in gold and silver, like everything. And then he tells his men to just strip it, right, to take everything they can. So we have no sense of what that city looked like, before. I mean, we have little glimpses and tellings, but that to me is probably the divine comedy of the East is Constantinople as a living city,
Wow. Oh, wow. Jonathan, it's always such a pleasure to interact with you. And also, I didn't get to thank you for having me and my wife out to ARC. That was it was a great experience. It was very telling of a lot of things. It brought up a lot of things, and there's a lot of stuff going on off the stage that was kind of interesting to see. But being involved, as you are in trying to find a place where culture can happen, I just really appreciate it, and I think that's so necessary.
Yeah, right, thanks to you. You have just been this amazing, stable place of. It's weird how you both have a kind of bravery to talk about things that nobody wants to talk about, but also just this kind of stable, calm sense that it's okay. Like we're going to talk about these things, and we're not going to, we're not going to lose it. We're not going to, and so it's great to see you keep the course like that.
Yeah, we don't rip the Band-Aids off here. We just gently kind of wiggle them, give them a little bit of air, and put them back on. See what's on the surface.
Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. My pleasure. All right. And then